Okay, why do I believe the Bible? So this is a very interesting question because we have a whole lot of other religions out there like evolution, Islam.
See, there's Jeremiah.
Man, I wanted to pull over and like see the ark.
Yeah,
Get on it.
Oh my gosh, you can see it. Look, everybody. Ahoy! Wait, do you see land?
That's the Ark of So here's the slideshow. I say my religion because I would argue that it's not necessarily a religion. If there's a king and you bow down to that king, would that be religious? And I'm back. Let's add the rest of the people to the show. We have Achilles and Awake Not Woke. What's your name again, Awake? Just wanted to make sure.
We're on sleep.
Or Crystal, whichever.
Jeremiah had a discussion backstage about saying private things online, and then he goes out asking Awake, what's her name?
Well, if she doesn't want to stay, she doesn't have to.
I don't mind. My episodes are titled "Awake Not Woke" with Miss Chris, so it's already out there.
Okay.
If you ask the direct person, like if you ask me where I live, well, then I get to choose if I want to say that or not. But
Where do you live?
I found it ironic, that's all.
2052, none of your business lane.
Okay.
Anyway, I actually don't know the address.
My dog is calling me. I think he wants to bite me. So I'll be right back. Awake, I didn't tell you that. My dog bit me.
Let's get on with the show, though, because last week we talked about this little guy right here. I want to add him to the stage. Oh, add to the stage. There we go. I got to shrink this tab so I can see it myself. There we go. And the main thing, if we started here, last time we said anger, right? Were we on anger last time?
Yes, you talked about anger last week.
Okay, did we ever get to sad?
I think so.
I forget. Did we ever get to sad, Mr. Achilles?
Yes, we did. And there wasn't much there, but we discussed about how he wept for Lazarus and for having empathy when others were weeping, that he was overtaken by sadness. So yeah, Jesus had a heart.
Well, so the question now, because I don't think we actually covered the final part because we were going over the entire list. Why? Why is sadness built into us? Why is it important that we're sad? Why is there a specific time to be sad?
You have here a lady, and you have somebody who also takes this as very, very important. So I'm gonna let the lady speak first. It's time to teach men how important sadness is. Go ahead, dear Crystal.
He's going to deflect to you, Crystal.
Crystal, are you there?
All right.
Chris.
Yeah, probably she got pulled to something else at the house.
I have an answer.
Sorry, I was looking at something. I just realized my husband's Bible got delivered, so I've got to turn around and grab it off my porch so it don't get rained on.
What kind of Bible did you get him?
I got him the same one that I have, which is like a Thomas Nelson study guide. KJV.
He took us on a trip. Sorry.
No, you can beat me up in person now. So I better.
It's about the Bible, though. It's about the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's not.
It is really kind of.
No,
Let's talk about people's Bibles.
Chris, tell him what you think about sadness.
I think sadness is a normal human emotion, and I think that there's a time and place for sadness. For example, if a loved one passes away, I think it's perfectly normal to be sad for a certain amount of time. And now I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know the appropriate, the exact appropriate amount of time. But it's also something that you don't want to be in too much, because if you're in sadness too much, then instead of being cathartic, it ends up, having the opposite effect and causing things like depression, which can have negative effects on your life and your job, your loved ones around you, etc.
So my question was specifically, why does sadness exist? I get that it's normal, but also watching porn is normal, so I don't care if it's normal. What I'm asking is, God build sadness into the humans. Why is it important to be sad? Why is it beneficial? Not just, it happens.
Maybe it's something similar to, have you ever heard, I'm sure you have, quotes of said in various different ways, but generally the idea is you can't have the light without the darkness, because if you don't have the darkness, you don't know how to appreciate the light. And so maybe if you don't have some sadness, maybe if you don't suffer loss, you don't truly get to appreciate happiness or joy and its fullness.
I think that is a very, very important characteristic of sadness.
How do you know what happy is? Yeah, how do you know what happy is if you don't have sad?
Yeah. Ryan, do you want to add your 2 cents?
Yeah, I think that sadness is very important because it shows that we care about others. For instance, Jesus wept when he saw the people mourning Lazarus's passing, Lazarus's death. He wept because he empathized with the sadness that these people were feeling. They obviously loved Lazarus. He apparently was loved by many, not just his 2 sisters, but had a lot of extended family, other family, friends were there. There were apparently a lot of people at his funeral there. And they were all very sad because, obviously Lazarus was very loved by many people, not just a few. And Jesus was overwhelmed. Well, he was moved to weeping by just simply feeling the pain that these people were feeling. Sadness is important. Something bad happened. For instance, if something bad happened to you, I would be very sad. I'd be very upset about it. Okay. All right. And by the way, so is it okay for me to acknowledge that today's your birthday? It just acknowledge.
Yes, we all acknowledge that today's my birthday, but I don't necessarily want us to make it too big of a deal.
It's not.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday. I'll sing along.
Was I muted or he muted me? He muted me. He muted me, didn't he?
I didn't mute myself because Ryan was joining in. I didn't do anything this day 21 years ago. I don't need to be
strip him off the administrative rights so we can sing for him. We can
administrate you to shut up.
But either way, I came up here to help him celebrate and to join you guys with him on the show, on the program.
Okay. To stay focused, Achilles, do you have anything to say about sadness and why it's important?
Before we say more about sadness, I just want to thank God for having you around.
Yes.
You are a beautiful, brilliant gift and contribution to this family. And happy birthday.
Okay, thank you. Now can we move on?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I had my mouse hovering over the mute button the entire time.
I could feel it. I knew it was there. So I was being very careful with my words.
Anyway, sadness. Do you have anything to add?
Well, as I told you last time, I'm an INFP. And this means that sadness and we go to bed together. And we have children every month. So sadness I would say, is one of the most usable feelings one can have, and it hides behind every bit of poetry, every bit of music, everything that ever touched you. It was written by somebody that was sad. When you are happy, you don't do things. When you are happy, you just are. You're enjoying it. It's only when you are sad that you are starting to change and make things and make changes in your life. So that's why God is using this, because for us, because when we are settling somewhere and we are happy, we tend not to want to move from that happiness. But when we are sad, we do anything we can to get out of it.
So I think that is a great point.
Yes.
No, go ahead, Achilles.
No, for now, I think that's a good start. For me, sadness is a big thing. I sleep with it.
Yeah. So my main contrast though is I would say joy and sadness, if anything, go hand in hand. It's you're having one or you're having the other, and it's that back and forth, which is the really healthy part. Because anger is like a momentary thing, and disgust and fear are momentary things. I feel like you're always either sad or happy though. You're always one of them. And I would say joy is important. It's more than just feeling good and sitting around. It's rejuvenating. It's healthy. It's that recovering. Where sadness is the thing that sets you free, joy is that moment of just taking in what is when you are free. And I want to point out something that I learned today, because I'm relearning how to have emotions from trying to suppress them all of these years. And what I learned today, because I woke up really sad today, and I thought to myself, I can either let my logical brain take over and I can suppress it, or I can utilize this moment in sadness and go through it. I can go over it or through it. If I go through it, I will have gained so much more. And to keep it short and sweet, when I went through it, and I was miserable and sad, but I went through it, and I dealt with it, instead of just saying, okay, well, I'm just going to ignore that I was ever sad and move on with my life. When I went through it, I went out on the other side, I felt free. I felt true joy. Not just a, okay, well, I'm okay, but no, I was happy. I was good. I was eccentric. Only because I actually went through my sadness.
Exactly my point. It is an important feeling.
The other thing I would say is sadness is like eyes. It's like being able to see. Sadness is like
what?
The ability to see. It's like your eyes.
It's like your eyes. Okay.
Yes. So what I noticed, and as Jesus wept in sympathy, when you can see
I want to interrupt because that's very important. Jesus didn't weep in sympathy. He wept in empathy.
Empathy may be a better word. Sometimes I get
it is because if something happens to you and it doesn't affect me, that's apathy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the exact opposite, and that is dangerous to your soul.
So, but I'm saying he had it affect him personally, and that's part of sadness. So if that's empathy, then great catch. So Jesus wept in empathy. And when he wept in empathy and he saw the pain of someone else, and then he had the pain himself, that is the eyes. That is being able to see something that you can't see physically. It's seeing the emotion. And I would say when you're sad, that's the only time you can see somebody else's emotion. Because if you're joyful, you're thinking about yourself. If you're angry, you think about yourself. Disgust and fear, they're all yourself. When sad, you can be thinking about somebody else's problem.
Yes.
You can see the anger of the world and be sad. You can see the disgust or fear of everybody else's stuff and be sad. And so, like today, for example, right? I use this example with my wife because she actually asked me, why would I be sad? Why do I need to cry? I don't want to cry. And I said, well, look, because Nehemiah is crying, I'm not exactly sure what he's crying for, but because he's crying right now, he is making me sad. He's making me have empathy towards him. I feel for him. And because I feel for him and I see that nobody's picking him up, I'm now getting angry that nobody's picked him up yet, and I'm going to go do something about it. And instead of laying in bed, just chillax and say, well, he can cry for a few more minutes. I'm like, no, I got to do something about this. because it's what I saw, and then I did. I was sad, then I got angry. Now, they were micro emotions. I weren't like bipolar about these things. But the fact is, I could recognize I got saddened. I had empathy for him. And then I turned around and I was angry that nobody was doing anything. Again, I'm almost over exaggerating the statement of I saw nothing, my heart went out to him, and I was like, let me go do something. Pretty much was it. But it was this acknowledgement of how the emotions work together and fire in a sequence to get you to do something that you would have otherwise not have done. Because I remember just earlier when Nehemiah was still, alive and still here, where I did not experience my emotions and I suppressed them. Nehemiah could cry for an hour, and if I was busy doing something, and I'm like, okay, well, you're fed, you're taken care of. What do you want? I can't figure it out, then who cares, right? I'll come back every 15 minutes and make sure you have food. And that was my thought process. Once I started opening up to my emotions and saying, no, emotions are important, I see this about him and I try to take care of him. Even if he doesn't need anything other than emotional attention, I give him that emotional attention now. So sadness is very important.
I agree. And well said.
Go ahead.
Earlier, Achilles, you were talking about how sadness causes you to do things and it moves you to do things. Anyone will say that the greatest songs were written by people who were sad at the time that they wrote them. It's emotional. Now, the great hymns that we sing in church were written by people who were sad when they wrote them. And I can think of one example. It Is Well With My Soul is considered one of the greatest hymns ever written. And it was written by a man who just lost his daughters in a shipwreck. So he wasn't happy when he wrote that. He was very sad. But sadness moves us, as you said, to do things, do great things. It's that emotion. It's like, I want to, that writing that hymn was probably therapeutic for him. Probably therapeutic for him to put those words on paper to help him grieve, help him deal with that grief. And so, yeah, that's the point. I just wanted to add to what you said, Achilles. When John Newton wrote Amazing Grace, can you imagine how sad he felt about his former life? I saw a movie that had him in it, and he was living in a monastery, and he said, I live with 20,000 ghosts. And you could just see the pain on his face when he said it. So anyway.
Or that hymn, I think it's called No Turning Back.
I have decided to follow Jesus.
I've decided to follow Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. And the story behind that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, about the family that refused to renounce Christ, and first the wife was killed or the kids. I can't remember who was killed first. But either way, the one by one, each family member was killed right there, refusing to renounce Christ. And I believe it had such a huge effect on the chief of the tribe or whoever it was, that the entire village became Christian, right? The entire village accepted Christ.
Yeah, I believe it was the chief who wrote the song. Looking at it. I'm not exactly sure who the original author of the song was.
Yeah, but that's the basic story. I have to actually look it up and do research to know the full answers. But yeah, it was based on a tragic thing that happened. For someone to say, I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. I mean, there are people even today in this world. He was
probably very sad, looking back at what happened once he converted. He was like, man.
If the chief wrote the song, definitely.
I can't.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he did or not, but he did. He did accept Christ.
We have all powerful Google here.
We know that he accepted Christ.
Who wrote
I have decided
the song? I have decided.
There it is. You can just click right there.
The first one?
Yeah. Sadhu Sundar Singh. The formation of the martyr's words into a hymn. Can they see this on the screen? Oh.
No.
Okay, I'll read it. Want me to read it?
Yeah.
Has been attributed to the Indian missionary Sadhu Sundar Singh. An alternative tradition attributes the hymn to Pastor Simon K. Marak from Zorat, Assam. The melody of the song is Indian and was titled Assam after the region where the text originated. That's all that shows.
So, yeah, so it was Sundar Singh.
But he was an Indian missionary.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's the one who was killed.
I think he was.
Okay.
I just remember it was an Indian guy. I do remember it was an Indian guy who decided to write that song. I don't remember if he was. Now I think about it, I think it was him himself who was going through it, but I'm not a historian. So.
And I want to say this, maybe let me know if I'm going off on a tangent, but for the vast history, the majority of this country's history, it's been easy to be a Christian because the country was culturally a Christian nation. But that is changing now, and people are becoming increasingly hostile towards this, towards Christianity. And so there's going to be a separating of the wheat from the tares. The people who are just playing church and aren't really serious about God, they're going to fall away. And the ones that are truly committed to him, they will become bolder the more they get persecuted. And Chris, you can probably speak to how you personally witnessed how our culture is becoming increasingly anti-Christian.
Yeah, during Holy Week, from Palm Sunday to Easter, a lot of people were saying Christ is King, and news outlets were coming out saying that it was a form of hatred. And that it was, they were liking it to violence, and that's just so absurd.
Yes.
I could go on about it a lot, but that's just one example of countless out there.
Okay, so let's move on to the next, the very next one right here, which is disgust. So we get that God was disgusted. I have one example right there, but why did God put disgust in us as humans? Why do we have that emotion?
And I do want to point out that's not the only example. We have a disgust from Jesus in the book of Revelation for those that are lukewarm.
Yes.
He spits them out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah. Now, why?
I think the reason why, or at least maybe one of the reasons, is to show when you've done something wrong, and something because disgust is not like, oh, someone accidentally stepped on my toe, or someone called me a name. So if the name was crude enough, maybe you could feel disgust for it, right? But like when you feel disgust towards something, or someone feels disgust towards you, it's an indication that you've done something very, very wrong.
Yes.
The first thing I think of when someone says disgust is the word pedophile. That is the first thing I think of when you say, what disgusts you?
Yes.
It'd be pedophile. And that is exactly what you said. A very, very wrong thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like the one we'll get next. It kind of also is a protective feeling when something is disgusting to eat. It's probably not good either.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're disgusted of something, you tend to get away from it.
You tend to vomit it or to push it away, or sometimes, like for example, as I mentioned, you can get angry against that person and cast judgment against them. You don't have to raise your hand. You just wait for a turn.
I think I said this last night. I think I touched on this last night. But the more God pulls me towards him and away from my former life, the more disgust I feel when I look back, which I don't want to do. I don't even like looking back. I don't like remembering. I wish I could. Well, I don't want to completely forget it because I have to remember that's not you anymore. But I get disgusted at things that I thought were just normal things for me to do. And I'm like, no, I was completely deceived and completely believing lies, and I'm now disgusted at the person that I allowed myself to become. Because when I first was exposed to that life, I was not a mature believer. I wasn't a committed Christian. And, for much of my youth, I considered myself a Christian, but I was self-righteous. That's the word. I thought I was good because I didn't do all these bad things. And so I was very immature. And that's why it was easy. Once I went on the internet, it was easy for the enemy to lure me into sin. It was easy for me to allow the enemy to lure me into becoming someone who was disgusting. And I'll say that I was. But now that I've been both a immature, self-righteous Christian and also a sinning, lukewarm, what's the word? Carnal, Stump's favorite word, carnal Christian. I've been both of those, and I never want to be either one ever again. I'm disgusted at being either one of them ever again.
I think disgust, as you mentioned, being protective, can make us push away from it even more.
Yes.
Because instead of it just being in the room, like let's say there's a smell, you get so disgusted at it, you're like, no, stay away. I don't want this. It can almost purify you. Does that make sense? Like disgust can be purifying.
Yeah, you just made a good point. When you first enter a room that stinks, you're like, ew. But if you stay in that room, what happens? You acclimate, you get used to it. And it's just like sin. It's just like, okay, a person who becomes a smoker, the first time they smoke, they're like, but then they get used to it and they start to like it. A person who drinks beer for the first time, 99% of people are going to be, that tastes terrible. But what do? They acclimate. They get used to it. So, you bringing up the stinky room, it just shows me how. But then once you leave the room for a while and get used to the fresh air, then you go back to that room, you're like, ew, how was I able to stay in that stinky room?
Yeah. I was actually talking to a guy named Luke. I bumped into him yesterday, and I was just talking about how it's my 21st birthday tomorrow and everything. And he was like, yeah, I had my 21st birthday. I drank one shot of vodka. It knocked me out and made me feel sick. I haven't touched it since. Now, he's not against it or anything.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to go and do it again later. But it's been 6 months. He's not touched another lick of alcohol since.
And let me tell you, this young man is not going to go to a bar and have 21 shots of liquor tonight. He absolutely will not do that.
Do people take 21 shots on their 21st birthday?
Unfortunately, that is a tradition that some people do practice.
21 shots.
21 shots.
Seems a bit excessive.
Yeah, and they do that to prove how manly they are. Look at me, I took 21 shots. It's like, that's not being a man. That is not being a man.
But that seems like that'd be pretty hardcore for a drinker already. I'm not exactly sure how much that is.
Most of the ones who do that have already been drinking for years. Most of them probably started when they were teenagers. Just drinking at a friend's house or something.
They already have all that brain damage.
Yeah, they already have all that brain damage.
Anyway, so yeah, disgust. The best way I can describe it is disgust is that thing that almost purifies you and keeps wicked from getting to you. And I mean, eventually you can get an acquired taste for things that your body naturally says is bad. Yeah. But it's definitely that thing that tries to push away from what it thinks is bad. Being protective. Crystal, you got anything you want to say? She gone again? She's gone.
She's probably, Atlas has probably got her occupied or something. Fear.
Yeah. Now, God had fear. God had fear that we don't normally think of. What is fear important for? Why would God put fear in us? Because the Bible says so many times, don't be afraid. It says in the Bible 365 times, don't be afraid. Later, it says like worry not, and worry is part of fear. So like, why would fear still be good? Why would God put fear in people? as a good thing.
If you don't mind. The Bible says fear is of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I know in the Bible also it says, fear not him who can destroy the body, but fear the one who can destroy the soul and the body in hell. I forget the reference on that, but I know y'all have heard it before.
That's in Matthew,
Is
when
Matthew?
God is sending out his disciples to go to the Israelites, to preach to the Israelites.
Yeah.
And he's like, don't fear them. They're going to, hate you. Fear them not, but fear.
It's like, we're not, as Christians, this is hard. This is something you have to learn. But as Christians, we're not supposed to be afraid of any human being, no matter who they are. If someone says, well, I could kill you, say, what, you mean send me home? You can send me home? Wow. Only God, we need to, when it says fear God, I don't think it means like be afraid. It means respect and reverence and know that it's just like Leary and I were talking, people that shake their fist at God. It's like, what do you think you can do to him? He could kill you like that instantly if he wanted to. And it's only by his grace that you're even able to shake your fist at him. It's only because of his grace that you're able to do it. So yeah, fear him. He's the only one who is worthy of our fear. The only one who deserves it. No human being deserves to be feared. Only God. But like I said, it's not the kind of fear that you're afraid he's going to zap you or anything. It's a fear, the kind of fear that says, I know what you're capable of, and it's by your grace that I'm here. It's by your grace that I'm saved. And I respect what you're able to do. I think that's one word. Anybody else would like to?
Yeah, Achilles, do you want to mention anything? Achilles? No? Just me? Okay. Well, I do have something to say. And maybe we're just like saying the same thing in different wording, but that's okay because sometimes people get different understandings, like different wordings of the same concept. When I hear fear is the beginning of wisdom, and don't fear, particularly the verses you mentioned, don't fear to not fear the one who can kill you, but fear the one who can kill your soul. What I think is, it's kind of like a king, right? How you respectfully fear a king, how the king would say, go do something, and you do it. And you might ask, well, what happens if you don't do it? You get punished. You could be put to death. The reason why we obey the laws, well, I mean, not necessarily Christians, but the reason why other people obey the laws is because they're afraid of being thrown in jail or being put to death or, whatever the punishment for that rule is. And so when he says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, it's kind of like you do what he says, you obey his commandments, partially because you fear him. You fear the consequence. You're not a backslidden Christian, again, because we love him, but also partially because you fear being whooped by him. And so that's also like a very important concept to understand, is this fear concept. So many people are like, oh, don't be afraid, never be afraid. Fear is important. All of these are important in moderation. And in closing, because it's my birthday and I'm going to go and do a bunch of other stuff. Closing all of this today, joy, anger, sad, disgust, fear, they're all crucially important. They all are very relevant to understanding yourself and how to use these things. And I mean, Jesus, as I mentioned, he had a superpower here. He understood these concepts and he was able to utilize them appropriately for what he needed to do. In wisdom, people like to push one way or the other, right? They say, oh, well, I have an anger issue, let me just suppress anger, right? They take the exact opposite. Let me suppress my anger, let me never do it. So they take this one route, suppressing anger, right? What they don't realize is anger is useful. yes, it's good to be able to put reins on your anger and to keep it at bay, but it's also important in an opposite direction. Say, hey, you know what? That anger, it can be useful. Well, I was always afraid, so I learned to not be afraid. Bible says, don't be afraid. Now I am never afraid, right? But then you learn in this opposite angle, right? There are times to be respectfully fearful of the right person and to not just be afraid of nobody. Because I've known people who just aren't afraid of anything. It's kind of like that person who's balancing on a beam way up in the air. You say, well, aren't you afraid of falling? And they say, nope, and then they die. You know what I mean? Like, there is a respectful fear of heights that you should have. There is a respectful fear of God that you should have. I've known people who aren't afraid of God at all. They have no fear. And I'm like, you should have a respectful fear of God. And, you know, they just spit out his name like it's nothing, and they talk about him like it's nothing. And I'm like, he's a gentle and loving and merciful God, but you should have a respectful fear over who you serve. We like to think of him as our buddy instead of our king. And yeah, he does want to be our friend, but he's also our king. Disgust purifies, sadness sees. I used to think, what does sadness have? What importance is sadness? It just hurts. Sadness sees. Sadness probably saves more lives than anger or joy or disgust or fear. Yeah. Understanding the other person probably saves more lives than any of the others. Achilles?
100%. Just back. I didn't hear anything before now, and what I heard, I agree 100%.
I was just going over a recap. And then anger. Anger is the call to action. Without anger, nothing gets done. Sadness sees, but if we don't get angry about the thing that we see, we don't do anything. We just sit there not doing anything. So we need to be angry. And a lot of people suppress their anger and never try to use it. And then joy. A lot of people think, oh, joy is just for having a good time. Joy is recovery. Joy is rejuvenating. Without joy, sadness would go into a depression state. We need that joy to recover from sadness, to recover from anger, to recover from disgust and fear. All of these, and as we go into the study, I'm learning so much. All of these different emotions perfectly complement each other. They don't just sit there on their own and like randomly flare and react. They work together in ways you'd never imagine. As I mentioned with the baby, because he was crying, I felt empathy for him. I was sad. Then I got angry that nothing was being done, and I took care of him and got rewarded. That's 3 of the 5 emotions right there in a few seconds. They do work together. Anyway, as I said, I'm going to cut it short. We're at 38 minutes. So it's definitely not one of my longer ones. But I feel like we hit on some very important topics today.
I just want to say that I am honored. Anytime I can be here in person, I am honored. It is a privilege.
Okay, and Achilles?
Yep.
Anything you want to say?
I could go on for sadness and empathy and what you said. I do think you nailed it on the head. It's very important. And people, when they get that, we have sadness inherited in us. It is in our genes. It has to do with this world. It has to do with how life has devolved, because this is Satan's world and we weren't supposed to live this way. We have become a little bit of slaves for this system. So this gives us sadness. So what people do when they wake up and they get that feeling that they are sad, they gotta rush and find and do something to get over it. They grab their phone and it's like start flicking through different pictures so they don't feel that feeling. But if you don't do that and you focus on the feeling, you will realize why you have it. There is always a source. And you are becoming less and less of yourself if you ignore and you push your sadness away. And then at some point, if you keep pushing it, it becomes panic attacks, it becomes depression, it becomes ill stuff. So by itself, sadness, it's something healthy. It proves you are alive. It proves that you see this world and you know there's something wrong with it. We are told to not love the world. Does that mean when I wake up and I see this world to be happy about it? Or the opposite? So you nailed it on the head. I just killed the rest of it, you know? Yeah.
Okay, with that being our last word, we're leaving. So bye.